Welcome to Wandering Jews, a J-Square Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
And I'm Sorrel. Picture this. We take our travelers to the bustling streets of Buenos Aires, a city alive with vibrant culture, tango rhythms, and rich Jewish history. But today, we're going to veer off the beaten path to uncover a lesser-known story, a narrative steeped in hope, survival, and a quest for belonging. Nestled deep in the Argentine pampas, about 400 miles from Buenos Aires, lies a small, almost forgotten town with a profound dream, Moisesville. As we explore the origins of Moisesville, we'll encounter themes of resilience and adaptation in the face of adversity. This town emerged as a beacon for Eastern European Jews in the late 19th century, fleeing persecution and violence, offering a glimpse into the struggle for a new identity in a foreign land. We'll discover the visionaries who sought to create a vibrant community and the vast pampas where dreams of freedom and security took root. But Moisesville also raises important questions about belonging. What does it mean to build a life in a place that may not be your ultimate homeland? How do dreams evolve when faced with the harsh realities of life? As we delve into this rich tapestry of history, we'll reflect on how these stories resonate with our own experiences and identities, shaping our understanding of what it means to find a place in the world.
So for those of you who are going to be traveling with J Squared Adventures to Argentina in the near future, we're very, very excited. This is, I think, a story, Sorrel, that you hinted at a little bit. It's a different search for Jewish identity, because a lot of times we come to Israel and we say to ourselves, oh, well, it makes 100% sense. We're going back to our roots. It's that sense of a search for, I'll call it, Jewish nativeness. It's going back to the Bible, Second Temple, the life of medieval Tzfat, and Jewish mysticism. It's about the early pioneers. It somehow all makes sense. And also when we're traveling to Eastern and Central Europe, so again, most of us look back, most American Jews, not all, but most, and we have some recognition. Hey, my family came from Poland, Russia, Lithuania,
right.
That whole sphere of Eastern and Central Europe. And so, wait a second, Argentina, what's the deal?
Argentina doesn't usually come to mind.
Exactly. Argentina doesn't usually come to mind. Although friends who I studied with at Hebrew U and my wife's uncle, who grew up in Mexico, came to live in Israel, was a shaliach in Argentina for a number of years for Bnei Akiva.
Nice.
And again, this kind of question of what is the Argentinian Jewish story and how is that a story of our roots as well? I think that that's one of the things to kind of play with, both through the story of Moisesville and also hopefully that people will have a chance to play with when they're visiting in Argentina. If we start the story, because every story has some beginning, I think you have to go back to that basic phrase there, but for the grace of God. And again, for families who were living in places like Poland and Grodno, or they were living in Kovno in Lithuania, or they were deep in the Tsarist Pale of Settlement, the area of Jewish concentration that was essentially the legal reserve where Jews were forced to live under the Tsarist regime.
The Pale of Settlement, right?
The Pale of Settlement, right. People at a certain point, poverty, anti-Semitism, by the 1880s, a wave of brutal pogroms, mainly in the southern part of the Pale of Settlement, that became known as storms in the Negev. Jews began to get up and leave. And it was time to go somewhere else. And there were those who said, some rolled the dice, some made ideological decisions, whether it was Eretz Israel, Palestine, whether it was coming to the United States, which was what most people decided to do, or whether it was Argentina. And the story of Moisesville really starts with a question of how did it happen? Because there are versions that say these groups of Jewish pioneers, originally they had wanted to come to the land of Israel, to Palestine, and to settle here. And whether it wasn't possible logistically, or whether, according to some stories, they got a bit bamboozled and the Jewish international bureaucracy a little bit threw them a curveball and they found themselves on the total other side of the world. It's a good question.
It could be also that Israel just was not, Palestine at that time was not ready to absorb the mass waves of immigration. That wasn't a reality.
No, for sure. That definitely was true to a large extent about the land of Israel during that period of the end of the 19th century. And again, Jews voted with their feet. Of the millions of Jews who lived under the Tsarist Empire, millions of them chose to come to America. That was the golden dream.
Right.
Those who chose to come to the land of Israel were few and far between, and even fewer and farther between were those who chose to come to Argentina. And so fleeing these dangers of Europe, fleeing the really horrible poverty that Jews were subject to, really that dream of, in some ways, a very personal dream. Hey, I want a better future for my children. And in a lot of ways, this was the dream of Jewish immigration.
And it's interesting when we talk about people packing up their belongings and they're fleeing. So that has very much a sense of emergency. Like, where do dreams play in? You can have your dream of your national homeland, but the vision and the reality of people needing to escape required a level of pragmatism. What makes the most sense? And that's where Baron Maurice de Hirsch comes in.
That's right. That's right. And de Hirsch, like other famous Jewish philanthropists from this period, if it was Montefiore earlier on, if it was the Rothschild family during this same period, Maurice de Hirsch played a very central role in the settlement, the establishment of the Jewish colonies in Argentina, really in an area that this area you referred to as the pampas, this frontier, this hinterland. And the Argentinians from the last part of the 19th century, they themselves realized that immigration was an important boon to the development, not just of these areas, but of the country writ large, bringing new people, bringing new blood, bringing new cultures, bringing new voices, bringing working hands, bottom line, to build Argentina. And so there is a kind of similarity to what was happening in America, what was happening in Australia, what was happening in Canada, immigrant societies who were welcoming, at least at certain times, all kinds of immigrants, including Jews, at least at certain times, in order to help build what they considered the future of their own countries. Now, Baron de Hirsch, he actually approached Herzl, or maybe Herzl approached Baron de Hirsch, but they talked. And in the pamphlet that Herzl will write in 1894, and this is already several years after the first Jewish agricultural colonies have been established in Argentina under Baron de Hirsch and the organization that he established, the Jewish Colonization Association, the JCA, Herzl writes in his pamphlet, The State of the Jews, hey, Palestine or Argentina? And he talks about Argentina. It's an enormous piece of land. It's open territory. It's fertile.
So much potential.
So much potential. But, he comes back, bottom line, the homeland of the Jewish people, the place where we grew up, wasn't Argentina.
Would you say it's fair to say that Baron de Hirsch was more of a pragmatist, whereas Herzl was more of a dreamer, visionary?
I think that's definitely one way to slice the cheese. I think another way to slice the cheese is that, Herzl was dreaming of a national movement to change the collective future of the Jewish people.
Right.
And at least in the way I understood it, Baron de Hirsch, he was looking to provide welfare opportunities for Jewish individuals and families, meaning he wasn't dreaming of establishing a Jewish state in Canada or in Connecticut, where there were also settlements that were planned by the JCA, by the Jewish Colonization Association. And he wasn't planning to set up a Jewish state in Argentina, but it was a way to say, hey, these Jews need help. And help means getting them out from under the Tsarist boot and bringing them to somewhere where they can breathe.
And that was all under the auspices of the JCA, the Jewish Colonization Association.
That's
this idea of creating settlements where Jews would come to settle the land, to build the land. Was Moisesville one of the first places under the JCA? It
was one of the first places, although it wasn't the only. And in the area around Moisesville, mainly in the region which is known as Santa Fe, again, outside of Buenos Aires, about 400 miles away. So it really is a hinterland, a frontier. This was an area that the Argentinian government, in discussions with the JCA, decided, hey, this makes sense for us. to make sure that this area has a sizable population, and Jewish immigration was one way to help bolster those numbers and begin to develop the land.
So how many Jews actually ended up in Moisesville?
So when you take a look, and this is always the question of history and of vision and of planning as opposed to what actually happens, what people decide and where they end up. Originally, when the JCA began, they talked about the immigration of 25,000 Russian Jews to Argentina during 1892 alone. That was the first full year of the project's existence. They wanted to see a situation of over 3 million.
That was the vision.
Eastern European Jews coming to Argentina, to one of these colonies. Listen, if you take a look, bottom line, in the course of 25 years, so about 2,500 immigrants actually made their way to Argentina. And Moisesville really became the main destination for the project. But at its height, we're talking about 27,000, 30,000 people, which in terms of like Israel today, it's roughly the size of a town like Sderot in the western Negev, or of the Arab city of Sakhnin. So it was sizable, I would say, but it definitely did not meet the scale that they dreamed of. And maybe that's one of the lessons about history, the best laid plans of mice and men, as the bard once said.
Yeah. And, when you think about these Eastern European Jews, like they are not arriving as experienced farmers. They're coming in as artisans, as shopkeepers, scholars. So building a new Jewish life in the Argentine pampas was, they had to really have a lot of inner fortitude to be able to turn this into reality. Definitely.
And that was part of the struggle, like Jewish immigrants who went to many places. I mean, obviously, Jewish immigrants who came to New York, they had their own struggles, but it was very, very different. New York City was still New York City at the end of the 19th century. The Argentinian plains was very much a wilderness, and whether it was hostile relations with the locals who were living there, whether it was unfamiliar conditions and language.
The extreme heat,
disease, being very far away from other Jewish communities, even the kind of cultural prejudice, I would say, that Eastern European Jews, when they looked at Argentina, all right, so the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, not everyone was going to go there, but people had this strong affinity based on Jewish tradition to the place.
It's funny to think, it's incongruous to think of a Yiddish culture flourishing in the pampas.
That's right.
It's not usually two things that you would associate.
That's right. And obviously New York was a dream in and of itself.
Yeah.
People had a strong sense, at least they thought they did, of what America was holding out to them and what New York held out to them. Argentina, people maybe had barely heard of it.
Right.
And on top of that, those people who started to learn something about it also realized that it was a country where Spanish culture was very, very central. And the memory of Spain, not its golden age, but the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492 still lived in the historic memory of Eastern European Jewry. They weren't sure what they were getting themselves into. So definitely it was a very, very challenging move to make for a young couple, for a family, for people who were literally leaving behind practically everything they owned and going out as refugees, essentially, to settle in the area of Moisesville and the other Jewish colonies.
It was called Moisesville, named after Baron de Hirsch. That's one theory,
That's right? That's right.
That it's named after his Hebrew name was Moshe.
Right.
Kiryat Moshe, weren't they originally going to call it?
Yeah, that was one of the ideas, and the name Moisesville stuck better for people, rang better for people. But by the 1930s, it was clearly known as the Jerusalem of Argentina, at least to the Jews. It was home to rich cultural life, Yiddish theater, Jewish sports teams, Jewish newspapers, a number of different synagogues. Of course, how can you have a Jewish community with only one synagogue? And there was a strong sense that this was something that had succeeded. And you talked about the idea of Yiddish and Yiddish language. It was one of the places in the world where Eastern European Jews were able to replant Yiddish language.
Fascinating.
And continue a lifestyle based in Yiddish, which was true with certain times in New York. It was true in certain times early on, even in the land of Israel, before the so-called language wars. But in Argentina, the place of language, both Yiddish and also Hebrew, within Jewish identity was very, very central. It was much more kind of a cultural, ethnic sense of Jewishness than it was a religious or faith-based one. And I think that's a kind of a red line that runs all throughout the story of Argentinian Jewish life from the period of Moisesville really up until today. Although, obviously, what can you say? Yiddish and Hebrew, even today, although they're living in the Argentinian Jewish community and schools still exist where study of Hebrew and study of Yiddish are done very seriously, the world is the world, and English today is really the language that many, many people look to among Argentinian Jews, both based on the history of anti-Semitism in Argentina all throughout the years, also based on the economic crises that periodically strike Argentina, and then people asking themselves once again, where is home? Where's my future? How do I build a better future for my children? And Argentinian Jews today, although it is one of the largest communities in the world with approximately 180,000 Jews.
Which was whittled down from originally, I think back in the 1930s, it was like 360,000.
Right. In the 60s, it was over 300,000. And again, the pull of other places, Israel, for sure, and many, many Argentinian Jews coming to Israel and bringing their very unique take on Jewish identity, Zionism, to this place. Many Argentinian Jews today also choosing, hey, Western Europe, Spain, for example, England, Canada, of course, and the United States. And so it's a community that is like maybe all Jewish communities is still dealing with that question, home and homeland. Is that where my future is going to be? Where can I find the best future for my children? And again, with all the changes, which are part of the perennial questions, maybe not just of Jewish life, but of many other small ethnic peoples living all over the world.
When we think about 1930s Jews in Moisesville, and if we associate the 1930s with the time when the Jewish population started to decline, right? Whether it be because of the Great Depression or the lure of, the city, whatever the factors are. At that time, what was the demographic of the Jewish population versus the non-Jewish population? How many Jews were living in Moisesville?
So in some of these towns and colonies, you had cities and towns where it was 80 and 90% Jewish.
Wow.
And again, the idea that we mentioned of Moisesville being called the Jerusalem of Argentina, very much reflected that. I remember reading some of the testimonials from folks who had memories of Moisesville during this period, or stories that they heard from their parents and grandparents, making the claim that, and the non-Jews, they spoke Yiddish just as well as the Jews. So, I don't know, we have
wild.
This nostalgia about the past maybe sometimes, but it does, I think, suggest something about the sense of home, at least during a certain period, that these people had.
So there was less hostility with the locals as time progressed?
That I'm not sure, because we know that, unfortunately, anti-Semitism has a very, very rich tradition in Argentina, also in more modern times. Argentina was under authoritarian, essentially fascist rule for many, many years. And the Jewish community definitely suffered, with thousands of Jews disappearing under the claim that they were dissidents, political threats to the stability of the regime, et cetera, et cetera. And this was one of the reasons that pushed Argentinian Jews also to come to Israel during this same period.
So in Moisesville today, there are still cemeteries and synagogues, not active necessarily. But... That's
right. And so although there are still small amounts of Jews still living way out there, 400 miles from Buenos Aires, in places like Moisesville and the other Jewish colonies in the Santa Fe region, few and far between. And like a lot of Jewish towns, I can think of places that I visited even recently in Europe, in a different context, where you end up seeing the old cemetery, what was a Jewish school. This was a Jewish hospital. In this store, the local Jewish newspaper was published. And you're a lot of times talking about the past. And I think that's the beauty of going to a place like Buenos Aires, because there you're not talking about the past. You're talking about a vibrant, living city with a huge Jewish population, with national institutions, with community associations, with schools, with synagogues, with youth movements, and with a diversity and a dynamism which for sure rivals Jewish communities in all the places that we know, whether it's in London or Paris or Boston or San Francisco or New York, and it's a different take. So in that sense, I think the visiting Argentina and particularly the city of Buenos Aires, it is, again, I go back to the beginning, it is a little bit of, but for the grace of God. Because when I think about our family, the Copelands and the Rudnicks who left the area of Kovna in Lithuania and came to Troy, New York, and to Dorchester outside of Boston, who knows? I mean, literally, people could have decided, my grandparents and great-grandparents, to take a different turn. What would have taken them to decide, hey, America, let's go to the land of Israel. Let's go to Palestine. What would have taken them to say, hey, New York, Boston, let's go to Argentina? And I would have ended up with a very, very different accent than I have today. But, I think that this is part of the interesting piece of journeying to these places. It's not just seeing the buildings, but I think it's mainly meeting others and seeing our own stories reflected through theirs and asking ourselves, hey, if we had ended up here and not in New Orleans and not in Denver and not in Chicago, what would I look like? What would I sound like? Who would I be? And I think that's the beauty of going to a community like Buenos Aires. So Moisesville, we won't get to, but you have to start the story somewhere. And having that beginning sense of pioneering, of the choices people made, of the way that history swept them up, and of the brave attempt that they made to make home. And what does making home mean? Hey, that's all of our story, regardless where we are.
And even just knowing that Moisesville has left its mark, is still a town named after Baron de Hirsch, is a testimony to the mark that Jews made in Argentina.
For sure. And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
We're back, as we always are, and today I'm very happy to welcome Brian Thomas. Brian is a long-standing member of the J Squared crew and family. He's one of our founding circle, and Brian is responsible, among other things, for all of our excellent work that we're doing outside of Israel. Brian, thanks for joining us, and welcome. Maybe first and foremost, will you share, please, a little bit about yourself, the family, what you do at J Squared?
Hi, Scott. Thank you for the invite. So as you said, my name is Brian Thomas. I have an additional last name also called Posinski or Puczynski for those Polish speakers. I'm originally from Argentina. I was born and raised there. I'm a father of two lovely girls, Chloe and Zoe. I currently based in South Africa, in Johannesburg. I've been here for the past 4 years. Previous to that, I lived in Israel for 8. And until my 20s, I live in Argentina. I currently project manager at J Square. I take responsibility of 4 destinations of Argentina, Portugal, Spain, and Morocco, together with other colleagues. Currently, I'm working a few projects for Argentina. Very excited about them. A good memory that I have from my early childhood in Argentina was spending Rosh Hashanah with the family at my great-grandmother's house.
Your great-grandmother was from
Poland. Today, it was Poland at the time. Today is actually under Ukraine. It's small shtetl called Jakslovice, if I'm not mistaken. I was able to meet her. Actually, she died quite elderly, about almost 100 years old. So I had time to talk about the family. So those are memories that I have very fond into my heart. That's something I really enjoy, family with everyone for Rosh Hashanah, or including Pesach.
Nice.
A big family.
And in that sense, the story is also different than a lot of our families, of a lot of our travelers, families that came from various parts of Eastern Europe. They were immigrants. They arrived in a new country, the United States, Argentina, in the case of your family. but a lot of the same background and a lot of those strong memories of spending Jewish holidays together, being around the table, hearing the stories, kind of keeping the tradition going, keeping the heritage going.
Exactly.
Nice, beautiful. And if you would suggest to travelers who are going to be traveling to Argentina, which is really, really exciting, what could they take a look at? What would you suggest that they take with them on the road, either before they travel or while they're traveling, or maybe when they get back?
So I'll recommend a book written by Alberto Gernashoff called Los Gauchos Judíos, and in English it's called The Jewish Gauchos of de las Pampas, that explain a little about the immigration in the late 1800s from Jews from Eastern Europe to the Pampas, that is the equivalent to the farms. So we're the first Jews that immigrated to work the fields, actually, and created different settlements or shtetls called in Yiddish around outside of Buenos Aires in the province itself and other provinces towards the field. This was also introduced by Baron Hirsch with help also from them, and explains about how they grew up in a completely new environment, new languages, but also keeping Yiddish at home, some of those Russian, for example, and learning some Hebrew at the synagogue, but at the same time going to schools, because public school was mandatory, learning Spanish and the Argentinian culture. What is also interesting about this book that was published in 1910, that is exactly 100 years from the time that Argentina was independent from Spain. So it was a very significant part of the history of the Jews in Argentina.
And I understood that there was even a movie made of the book in 1975, an Argentinian movie.
Correct. There was also a movie about this topic. It's a very interesting topic, since it explains the way of what kibbutzim were supposed to be in Israel when Israel was created. Yeah. So there's a lot of mixing with Zionism and the Holy Land.
Definitely.
Into this.
Beautiful. And so I think for our travelers, again, just like your family and the people who are described in this novel, people coming from Eastern Europe, people arriving in a new promised land. And so there's a strong, in some ways, similarity to the American Jewish experience. But there's also here a very unique, different story, which is similar to the Israeli story. Pioneering, farming, going out to an area that was in some ways a wilderness, and try to make it your own, and changing both the land and also in some ways the Jews themselves. And of course, not in English, not in Hebrew, but at least first in Yiddish and then later in Spanish, the Jewish Gauchos of the Pampas. So if people have a chance, definitely try to pick up a copy, check out your local bookstore, check out your favorite online bookseller, and hopefully this will be another way for people to dive in and take part in the very interesting story, unusual story, long-standing story of Argentinian Jewry. Brian, thanks so much for joining us. And I look forward to hearing about adventures of our groups as they arrive in Argentina and have a chance to get to the country and have a chance to interact with the local Jewish community.
Thank you so much, Scott.
So, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.